Imagine one single gene sitting quietly inside almost every human being on this planet, doing its job for decades without complaint. Then one day, scientists discover that this exact gene might be responsible for over 90% of every Alzheimer's case on Earth. Not a rare mutation, not something only unlucky families carry. A gene that almost all of us already have in one form or another. That is exactly what a team of researchers just uncovered, and the numbers are so staggering that even seasoned dementia scientists were shocked. If you have ever worried about memory loss, watched a grandparent forget your name, or simply want to protect your own brain for the future, this discovery changes everything you thought you knew about Alzheimer's disease. For decades, Alzheimer's has been treated like a mystery with 1,000 possible suspects. Doctors blamed aging, they blamed diet, they blamed stress, poor sleep, high blood pressure, and bad luck. All of those things do play a role, but none of them fully explained why some people develop severe memory loss while others live into their 90s with sharp, clear minds. Alzheimer's disease currently affects tens of millions of people worldwide, and that number keeps climbing every single year. Families watch loved ones slowly disappear, piece by piece, while researchers scramble to find the true root cause. For a long time, the picture felt incomplete, like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. That missing piece may have just been found, and it has actually been sitting right in front of scientists for over 30 years. It is called the APOE gene. You may not have heard of it before today, but after this video, you will never forget it. This gene faced a much higher risk of developing the disease. Back then, scientists assumed they understood the full picture. They believed one risky version of the gene, combined with one neutral version, explained most of the danger. It turns out they were only seeing a small slice of the truth. A team of researchers, led by scientists at University College London, decided to take a much closer look. Instead of relying on smaller studies, they pulled together enormous data sets covering more than 450,000 people. That is nearly 500,000 human genomes analyzed together, searching for patterns that earlier, smaller studies simply could not detect. What they found completely rewrote the story of Alzheimer's genetics. According to their calculations, somewhere between 72 and 93% of Alzheimer's cases would likely not occur at all without this one gene's involvement. On top of that, roughly 45% of all dementia cases, not just Alzheimer's specifically, were also connected to the same genetic culprit. Let that sink in for a moment. A disease that steals memories, personalities, and independence from millions of families might be driven, in the vast majority of cases, by variations of a single gene. This is not some obscure genetic defect either. It is a completely normal, extremely common gene that every single person on Earth carries 2 copies of, one inherited from each parent. The difference lies in which version of that gene you happen to inherit. To understand why this matters so much, you need to understand how APOE actually works. This gene comes in 3 common versions, known scientifically as alleles. Researchers label them epsilon 2, epsilon 3, and epsilon 4. Since you inherit 1 copy from your mother and 1 from your father, there are 6 possible combinations a person can end up with. Some people carry 2 copies of epsilon 2, others carry a mix of epsilon 2 and epsilon 3, some carry 2 copies of epsilon 3, others carry epsilon 3 paired with epsilon 4, and a smaller group carries 2 copies of epsilon 4. For years, scientists knew that having 1 or 2 copies of epsilon 4 dramatically increased Alzheimer's risk. They also knew epsilon 2 seemed to offer some protection. The middle version, epsilon 3, was treated as the safe, neutral option, since it is the most common variant found in around 3/4 of the entire population. Here is where the story takes its biggest twist. This new research suggests that epsilon 3 is not neutral at all. It turns out that epsilon 3 quietly raises Alzheimer's risk too, just not as dramatically as epsilon 4. Because epsilon 3 is so common, carried by the overwhelming majority of people worldwide, its cumulative effect across the population turns out to be enormous. Scientists had been so focused on the dangerous epsilon 4 variant that they overlooked the much larger population-wide contribution coming from the supposedly harmless epsilon 3. When researchers finally combined the effects of both epsilon 3 and epsilon 4 together, the numbers exploded far beyond anything previously estimated. One of the lead scientists behind this discovery explained that the field had genuinely underestimated how much this gene contributes to the overall burden of Alzheimer's disease. For years, everyone treated epsilon 4 as the villain and epsilon 3 as an innocent bystander. This research shows that when you look at the full picture, APOE potentially plays some role in almost every single case of Alzheimer's disease that exists. That is an extraordinary claim for any single gene to make, especially one that nearly every human being carries in some form. So how exactly does this gene cause so much damage inside the brain? APOE is responsible for producing a protein that helps manage fats and cholesterol throughout the body, including inside brain cells. In a healthy brain, this protein also plays a crucial role in clearing away a sticky substance called amyloid-beta. Amyloid-beta naturally forms in the brain, but it needs to be cleared out regularly, almost like taking out the trash. When the epsilon-4 version of APOE is present, the resulting protein becomes less effective at doing this cleanup job. Amyloid-beta starts building up instead of being cleared away, eventually forming hard clumps known as plaques between brain cells. These plaques are one of the classic hallmarks doctors look for when diagnosing Alzheimer's disease. But amyloid buildup is only part of the story. The APOE protein produced by riskier gene variants also disrupts how brain cells manage fat and energy, which are essential for keeping neurons alive and functioning properly. On top of that, these variants appear to trigger increased inflammation inside brain tissue. Chronic inflammation slowly damages delicate neural connections over time, making the brain more vulnerable to the kind of degeneration seen in Alzheimer's and related dementias. Scientists are still working to fully understand exactly why epsilon-3 raises risk compared to epsilon-2, but the early evidence suggests similar underlying mechanisms may be at play, just to a lesser degree. Now, before you start panicking about your own genetics, there is something incredibly important you need to hear. Carrying a risky version of APOE does not guarantee you will develop Alzheimer's disease. Even people with the highest risk combination, meaning 2 copies of epsilon-4, still have a lifetime risk below 70%. That means even in the worst case genetic scenario, roughly 1 in 3 people with that combination will never develop the disease at all. Genetics loads the gun, but it does not always pull the trigger. Other factors, both genetic and environmental, interact with APOE in complex ways that scientists are still working to fully map out. This is actually one of the most hopeful parts of this entire discovery. Other major research has estimated that around half of all dementia cases worldwide could potentially be prevented or delayed by addressing modifiable lifestyle factors. Things like managing high cholesterol, staying socially connected, avoiding smoking, controlling blood pressure, protecting your hearing, and staying physically active all appear to influence dementia risk, regardless of which genetic cards you were dealt at birth. In other words, even if you carry a higher risk version of APOE, your daily choices and environment still matter enormously. Your genes are not your entire destiny. Quick pause here. If you're finding this breakdown genuinely useful, drop a like on this video right now. It genuinely helps this important research reach more people who need to hear it. So, what does this discovery actually mean for the future of Alzheimer's treatment? For years, drug companies and researchers poured enormous resources into targeting amyloid plaques directly, with mixed and often disappointing results. This new understanding of APOE's massive role suggests that the field may have been aiming at the wrong target all along, or at least an incomplete one. If APOE truly sits behind the vast majority of Alzheimer's cases, then targeting this gene directly, or the biological pathway connecting it to the disease, could unlock treatments capable of preventing or slowing a huge proportion of all dementia cases worldwide. That is an enormous shift in strategy for an entire field of medical research. Scientists are already exploring exciting new tools that could make this possible. Advances in gene editing and gene therapy have progressed rapidly over the past several years, opening doors that simply did not exist when APOE was first linked to Alzheimer's back in the 1990s. Beyond editing the gene itself, researchers can also target the biological pathway between the gene and the disease using more conventional drugs, potentially correcting the downstream effects without needing to alter DNA directly. Despite APOE's now confirmed massive influence, remarkably few current clinical trials for Alzheimer's treatments actually target this gene directly. Experts in the field are calling for that to change immediately, arguing that research funding and drug development have simply not matched the true importance of this genetic factor. It is also worth understanding why this discovery took so long to fully emerge. Earlier studies simply did not have enough data on people carrying 2 copies of the protective epsilon-2 variant, since this combination is relatively uncommon compared to the others. Without enough of these low-risk individuals to compare against, researchers could not accurately calculate a true baseline risk level. This latest study solved that problem by combining 4 massive datasets together, finally gathering enough people with the rare epsilon-2 combination to serve as a reliable, low-risk comparison group. That single methodological improvement is a major reason why the newly calculated risk percentages ended up so much higher than anything estimated before. Researchers involved in the study were also careful to point out some important limitations. The 4 separate datasets they combined did not all produce identical results, and the estimated range of 72 to 90. 3% reflects that natural variation. Differences came from how each study defined and diagnosed Alzheimer's disease, whether through medical records, clinical dementia classifications, or evidence of amyloid buildup seen directly on brain scans. Differences in how long researchers followed participants, along with potential biases in who chose to participate in each study, also contributed to the range. Even accounting for all of that uncertainty, the evidence consistently pointed toward the same overall conclusion. APOE is likely responsible for at least 3 out of every 4 Alzheimer's cases, and quite possibly even more than that. Experts from major dementia research organizations have responded to these findings with genuine excitement, tempered with appropriate caution. While acknowledging that not everyone carrying these gene variants will develop Alzheimer's, they emphasize that the sheer scale of APOE's influence demands far more research attention and funding than it has historically received. Given how few current treatments in development target this gene directly, there is now a real opportunity for pharmaceutical research to pivot towards strategies specifically designed around APOE and its biological pathways. So what should you actually take away from all of this information? First, understand that having a risky version of APOE is incredibly common. It does not mean your future is already written. Genetic testing for APOE status exists, but many doctors and genetic counselors currently recommend caution before pursuing it outside of a clinical research context, since the emotional impact of learning this information can be significant and actionable. Medical guidance based purely on APOE status remains limited for now. Second, focus energy on the modifiable risk factors that are firmly within your control. Prioritizing cardiovascular health, staying mentally and socially engaged, managing cholesterol, avoiding smoking, protecting your sleep, and staying physically active all appear to meaningfully influence dementia risk, regardless of the genetic hand you were dealt. It also helps to understand how this discovery fits into the bigger picture of Alzheimer's research overall. There are actually other genes linked to Alzheimer's disease, but those tend to be extremely rare mutations passed down through a small number of families, causing early onset forms of the disease that can strike people in their 40s or 50s. Those rare genetic cases only account for a tiny fraction, often estimated at around 1% or less of all Alzheimer's diagnoses. APOE is completely different. It is common, it is found in every population studied, and it primarily influences the far more widespread late onset form of Alzheimer's that typically appears after age 65. That distinction matters enormously because it means insights from this research could realistically help the overwhelming majority of people living with or at risk of this disease, not just a small number of families carrying rare mutations. It is also worth pausing to appreciate just how massive dementia has become as a global health challenge. Millions of new cases are diagnosed every single year, and as populations around the world continue aging, that number is projected to keep climbing for decades to come. Family caregivers often carry enormous emotional and financial burdens, watching loved ones lose their memories, their independence, and eventually their ability to recognize the people closest to them. Every year without an effective treatment adds to that global burden. That is exactly why a discovery of this scale carries so much weight. Redirecting research funding, drug trials, and scientific attention toward a single, well-defined common genetic target could accelerate progress far faster than continuing to chase a wide scattering of smaller, less impactful leads. Some people naturally wonder whether this means a cure is right around the corner. Realistically, that is not how medical research usually works, and scientists studying APOE are careful not to overpromise. Turning a genetic discovery into an approved, widely available treatment typically takes many years of additional laboratory research, animal testing, and multiple phases of human clinical trials. What makes this discovery so significant is not that a cure is guaranteed tomorrow, but that researchers now have dramatically more clarity about where to focus that long, expensive process. Instead of spreading limited research funding across dozens of competing theories, the field can concentrate resources on a target that appears to influence the vast majority of cases. That kind of clarity tends to shorten the overall path toward meaningful treatments, even if it does not happen overnight. There is also a broader lesson here about how scientific understanding evolves over time. For decades, epsilon 3 sat quietly labeled as the neutral, unremarkable version of this gene, simply because it was so common that its individual effect seemed negligible, compared to the more dramatic epsilon 4 variant. It took researchers analyzing data from nearly 500,000 people, specifically designed to isolate the rare epsilon 2 group as a genuine low-risk baseline, to finally reveal how wrong that assumption had been. This is a great reminder that even well-established scientific consensus can shift dramatically once better data and better methods become available. Science is not a fixed set of facts. It is an ongoing process of refining our understanding as tools and evidence improve. Third, and perhaps most importantly, stay hopeful about where this research is heading. Discoveries like this one do not happen every day. Identifying that a single, common, well-studied gene may be responsible for the overwhelming majority of Alzheimer's cases gives researchers an incredibly clear target to pursue. Clear targets lead to focused research. Focused research leads to breakthroughs. And breakthroughs, especially ones backed by data from nearly 500,000 people, tend to move faster than anyone initially expects. The scientific community now has a roadmap that simply did not exist a few years ago, and that roadmap points directly toward APOE. Before we wrap up, if this video taught you something new about the biology behind Alzheimer's disease, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next major breakthrough in brain science and medical research. This field is moving faster than most people realize. It is easy to feel powerless when discussing a disease as devastating as Alzheimer's. Someone you love can feel like witnessing something completely beyond anyone's control. But discoveries like this one are exactly why hope remains justified. Just a few years ago, nobody could have told you that one single gene might explain the vast majority of every Alzheimer's case worldwide. Today, thanks to painstaking research across nearly 500,000 people, that is precisely where the evidence points. Science does not always move quickly, but when it does uncover something this significant, it tends to open doors that stay open for good. There is one more angle worth exploring before we close things out, and that is what this discovery means for families who already have a history of Alzheimer's disease. If you have watched a parent or grandparent struggle with memory loss, it is completely natural to wonder about your own risk down the line. This research does not change the advice doctors already give in that situation, but it does add powerful new context behind it. Rather than viewing family history as a vague, unexplained pattern, we now have a much clearer biological explanation for why. Alzheimer's often runs in families, tied directly to which combination of APOE variants gets passed down through generations. That clarity can be genuinely reassuring, because vague uncertainty is often scarier than a clearly understood risk factor that comes with real, actionable steps you can take. It is also worth remembering that genetic risk and genetic destiny are two very different things. Even within families carrying higher risk APOE combinations, some relatives develop the disease while others live long, cognitively healthy lives well into their 80s and 90s. Researchers believe this variation comes down to a complex mix of additional genes, environmental exposures, lifestyle choices, and even sheer chance. Understanding APOE does not erase that complexity, but it does give scientists a powerful new lens to study exactly how those other factors interact with genetic risk. Future research will likely explore why some epsilon 4 carriers remain protected, since uncovering those protective mechanisms could lead to entirely new treatment strategies that benefit everyone, regardless of their own genetic makeup. The next chapter of Alzheimer's research will likely focus heavily on APOE, its protein, and the biological pathways connecting it to memory loss and cognitive decline. Drug developers now have a clearer target than they have had in decades. Genetic researchers have a foundation strong enough to justify serious investment in gene editing and gene therapy approaches, specifically designed around this discovery. And for everyday people simply trying to protect their own brain health, this research reinforces something doctors have said for years. Your daily choices genuinely matter, even when genetics are working against you. Alzheimer's disease has taken so much from so many families over the decades. For the first time in a long while, researchers finally have a clear, data-backed target that could change the trajectory of this disease for millions of people in the years ahead. One gene, present in nearly everyone on the planet, may hold the key to preventing the majority of Alzheimer's cases that would otherwise occur. That is not just an interesting scientific footnote, it is potentially one of the most important medical discoveries of this decade, and the story is still unfolding in real time. Keep in mind that research like this moves quickly, and new findings tied to APOE are likely to keep emerging over the coming months and years. What started as a gene labeled mostly harmless just a few decades ago has now become one of the single most important targets in the entire fight against Alzheimer's disease. Staying informed about developments like this one is not just interesting trivia. It is genuinely useful knowledge for protecting your own brain health and understanding the risks faced by the people you love most.